and then we'll start the process. Your case has been assigned to Mrs. Jackson. So let's just jump right in, Mr. Monk. You are Richard Monk. Your DOC number is 106091. You're here today seeking a commutation of your sentence. You were sentenced in Rapides Parish in September 1983 for a second-degree murder conviction. You received a life sentence. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
correct? Right. Would you answer Mrs. Jackson's questions, please?
Yes,
Hi,
ma'am.
good afternoon, Mr. Monk. I just have a few questions of you. How old are you?
I'm 59 now.
All right, and how long have you actually been incarcerated on this charge?
39 years.
So you were 20, 19 or 20 when you committed this crime, is that correct?
I was 19.
Okay. According to the record, your car broke down across the street from a convenience store that was also connected to an insurance agency owned by a woman. You went to the convenience store, she went to the convenience store. At some point in time, you ended up in her insurance agency. So tell us what happened after you went into her insurance agency.
I went into her insurance agency. I talked to Miss Prather, and we were talking about some insurance. And later on, she went into the back to get a calendar, and I followed her back there, and I stabbed her 4 times. And then I picked up the calendar and walked out.
Okay, tell us why you did that.
I don't have any idea. I can't remember why I did it. I'd been drinking heavily and I blacked out. And when I came to, I saw what I had done.
Well, what was your purpose in going into the insurance agency?
To talk with her. I had no intent to do her any harm when I walked in. But I just walked in there to being curious about insurance and such.
All right, and then after you stabbed her, you stabbed her 5 times, 4 times in the chest and 1 time in the neck. So after you stabbed her, what did you do next?
I walked out and I walked down the road and I left town. I put my knife and the calendar in the car and I walked down the road. I was confused and I just kept walking and I caught a ride to my home.
Then what happened?
I got home, we sat there and we talked and I left and got a ride back to Glenmore. We towed my car back to my wife's grandfather's house and I went home. The next day when I saw the police, I walked up to them and they looked in my car and then they arrested me.
I know that you had been in the Navy and you received a less than honorable discharge. Tell us about that.
When I was in the Navy, I got into a situation where I was robbed and had my throat cut and I started having issues with alcohol. The Navy put me through counseling for a little while, but then they decided that I was no longer fit, so they gave me other than honorable discharge because I kept getting in trouble.
So you acknowledge that you had a drinking problem.
Yes, ma'am.
You also used drugs.
Ma'am,
You also used drugs.
I had experimented with marijuana and a few drugs.
While you were in the Navy.
Yes, ma'am.
At what age did you start the use of alcohol?
I started when I was about 13 or 14.
Right. And you continued up until the time you committed this crime, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How old were you when you went enlisted in the Navy?
I was 17,
And how long did you actually stay in the Navy?
a little over a year.
And when you got out of the Navy, what did you do then?
I came home and bummed around trying to find work. I worked different jobs, hauling pulpwood, planting pine trees. And wherever I could find work, I took it.
What about your drinking?
It was sporadic.
What do you mean sporadic?
When I had money, I'd get drunk. When I didn't have money, I wouldn't drink.
How much did you have? How much had you been drinking the day that you killed Miss Prater?
But I started drinking early that morning. I drank maybe a case of beer. I bought a 6-pack at one store in Oakdale. Then I went to Elizabeth. I bought another 6-pack there, and I was driving around. And when my car broke down, I stopped. Bought another 6-pack. So I've been drinking about a case of beer.
So let's talk about the last 39 years. What kind of substance abuse programs have you participated in during your incarceration?
When I first came to Angola, I got in with AA. It was an inmate-run organization, and we talked amongst ourselves. So I got in with that, and I learned that sobriety was something that's important and something that's closely guarded and something that you have to work at. And then when they came up with these other programs, I got charged with that. I started with changing my life.
And tell me what programs you've done besides AA.
AA and their substance abuse. I took that class.
What was the name of the substance abuse class?
That was it. It was living for a change, or all we called it was substance abuse.
Was it living in balance?
Yes, ma'am. Living in balance.
Tell me what you learned in living in balance.
I learned that sobriety, you have to work at it. That it's not something that you just start with and then you go on off. Once you get it, you can go on about your business. That you always have to work at it. That you
Let me
it's
talk
something.
about, we'll talk about how you work at it. That's just kind of words, but I see that you only took part 1 of living in balance.
Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't you complete both phases of it?
They moving us around at the time. When I took that, I was at Camp C, and we kept moving around.
How long ago did you take living in balance?
That's been about 13 years ago.
And in that 13 years, you never had an opportunity to take the second phase of it?
Well, I've been working and I've gotten into other classes, but no, ma'am, I haven't taken the second phase of it.
All right, so you also took thinking for a change.
Yes, ma'am.
When did you take that?
That was about 5 years ago.
Get out of that.
Ma'am,
What did you get out of that?
I learned that you have to, before you act, you have to think about what you're doing, who it affects, and think about what you got to lose, how far you've come so far, that you can't just throw things away. You have to think things through.
And I see you took anger management. When was that?
That's been over 14 years ago.
Remember anything about anger management?
Yes, ma'am. I
Learn.
learned that I can't let my anger rule me, that I have to take control of it. And if something's getting me upset, that I have to back off and get control of myself and my emotions and think before I do anything.
I see, are you still enrolled in victim awareness or have you completed that?
I have 2 more weeks before it's completed.
Okay, so tell me what you've gotten out of it so far.
I've gotten out that anything that we do when we hurt someone, that it doesn't just stop there. That as long as we're going through life, that they're gonna carry that pain and I'm gonna carry the weight of what I've done to them on my shoulders. That I can't just say I'm sorry and get on about my business and think it's good. I have to work and try to make amends for what I've done.
About how old do you think the victim was?
She was in her late 30s, I believe.
And how do you think your crimes have affected her family?
I think they was very hard on her family. I think they, cause they lost her at a time when they should have been secure. That, and it was, uncalled for. Miss Prather didn't do me nothing. And, I take responsibility for what I did. She, I took her away from her friend and her husband and her sister. And it changed the rest of their lives.
What's your present job at the prison?
I'm a welder at Prison Enterprise Range Crew,
And how long have you had that job?
13 years.
And what other jobs have you had for a long period of time?
Well, I was at, Row Crop, Prison Enterprise, Heavy Equipment for 7 years. I was at Prison Enterprise Row Crop for 3, 4, 5 years. I was at AS&R Mechanic Shop for 3 years. Those were the longest held jobs.
What kind of clubs or organizations do you participate in?
I'm currently I'm in with Vets Incarcerated.
Okay, and how long have you been in that group?
I've been in that group for going on off and on for about 20 years now.
What do you do in that group? You
We
post-
get together before. We used to do toy runs and drives for kids. Now we get together and we do things for help veteran centers on the street.
Any other community service while you've been incarcerated?
Yes, ma'am. We've done toy runs and walk for Jerry's kids. I've worked for Beeline Rec for the free people. And I've done work anytime they need me to help them with something, fix or repair something or build something for them.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, ma'am.
I saw your disciplinary record. You had 16 write-ups in almost 40 years is not a bad disciplinary record. Your last one was in 2000, and that was a contraband.
That was a urine test for marijuana.
You were using marijuana in 2000.
Yes, ma'am.
Last write-up.
Yes, ma'am. That's the last time I've used it.
Well, if you were to be successful, Mr. Monk, how do you plan to stay sober? Because alcohol has been a problem for you virtually all of your life, even after you got into prison. So if you are released at some point, what's your plan to be able to stay sober?
I plan to, if I get out, I plan to get in touch with a local AA center and get in with a group. And I'm going to work. I'm getting with the Parole Project let them help me get oriented for the street. And I'm gonna try to work to stay sober because I've lost 40 years of my life from alcohol. And I don't want to.
Do you consider yourself an alcoholic?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, are you an alcoholic today?
Yes, ma'am. Once an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic.
Okay. And those are good words to know, but sobriety can be hard.
Yes, ma'am. It's something that you always have to work at and you have to be on guard to hold on to.
Where's your family? You
They're
have,
right here.
that's your family?
Yes, ma'am.
What's your, I know parole project is short term, but what's your long-term plan? Where are you gonna live? How are you gonna support yourself? What's your long-term plan?
Once I get through with the parole project and they help me get oriented so I can transition to going on my own, I'm gonna have a job. I'm gonna try to get as much work as I can. I want to get property and help my mother out and get things together with my brothers and then try to help my mother and get my family all back up on their feet and take care of them. And I want to leave a positive legacy for my grandkids.
How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 3.
Do you have a stable job offer as
Yes,
we,
ma'am.
and where is that?
With my son-in-law, he offered to help me, but the parole project's gonna help me get a good job, and it ain't gonna be hard for me to find any work because I'm a welder, mechanic, equipment operator. So work ain't gonna be nothing to find.
And you have certifications in some of those?
No, ma'am, but I can get them once I get out. I go to work for a construction company and take the certification test and get certified so they can get insured, and I go to work for them.
Warren, what can you tell us about Mr. Monk?
You've been thorough in your questioning. He has been since going back as far as 1996 is pretty much 95, 96 when he started working in heavy equipment. And since then, he has been through heavy equipment, tractor crew, tractor repair, AS&R, range crew. And so we're looking at from 95 to present, he's worked in the capacity of mechanic, welder, those things that he's talked to you about, you questioned him about. He's done a really good job for us in that capacity, helping us keep our equipment running, as well as being able to operate it.
And what's his trustee status?
He's a Class A. He's been a Class A since the mid-90s.
Okay. All right, thank you, Warren Fowler. From my hand.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions, so let's hear from the folks who are there with you in support. Could we hear from Alicia, your daughter?
Yeah.
My dad was 20 years old when he came in. A lot of people have done really stupid things when they were young. Because of him, I didn't do as many stupid things. My future father-in-law has a heavy equipment company. I'm sure he would be more than willing to help my dad get on his feet. He's also a recovering alcoholic. So he knows what my dad's going through. I believe that there are things in your life that create the need for change. When Miss Prather died, that created the catalyst for my dad to change his life. He had to get himself fixed because he had to make amends for that. And he had a reason to change his life because he had to set a good example for me. Because he could not be the person he was when he committed this crime. he will never do the things that he has done before again, because he has learned a better way to do things and a better way to live his life. He's been an amazing dad for all 39 years. He's been incarcerated. He's an amazing granddad, and he's going to be an amazing great granddad. I just hope you see what I see.
All right, thank you, ma'am. And I believe, Mr. Freeman wants to speak.
Yes, I haven't been able to meet Richard many times in person, but when I did, I looked at the man and looked him in the eye and shook his hand and took my own measure. And what I saw looking back at me was a father, a man with talent and value, and somebody that had been paying a very long time for his crime, and but has spent those years, many years, the best he could, being the best father, grandfather he could, and in my opinion, better than a lot of free men out there who had all the chances. And he only got his in 15-minute calls at a time, hour-long visits, but he did his level best, and he has been paying, and he knows what it has cost his family, his daughter, his grandkids, his mother, his brothers. And I see a man who has done everything he can to pay and to make amends, to change himself and his life for a chance like this. And I just hope you look in your hearts and can see that too. Thank you.
All right, and here with us, we have Ms. Townsend. Ma'am, would you step up to the podium?
I'm Linda Townsend. I'm your ex-wife. He has been there, even though he couldn't be physically with her. He has been emotionally there with her. If she was acting out at home or at school, we could take her down there to him, and all he had to do was talk with her. And I mean, that's great. That's a problem right there. He same way. He talked with him. She called her mother, and her mother said for her to go down there. Take kids. Everything's fixed once they talk about. He's gonna be an amazing great grandfather too. He gets out, because he's gonna be really gets out. This man doesn't show work or do anything. He's walked 15 miles a day, one way, just to see me every day. Because we were dating, my mama didn't like her just staying over or whatever. Then he walked back home. Sometimes she'd let him sleep in the car. We got married, he got a job, he went to that job every day he could. He has never turned his back on the kid, even though she had done a lot of things that probably he should have got on to her about. Instead, talked to her and made her see what she would do. He didn't want her to turn out like her. And he told her. It is amazing. Once he is out, he will not go back to that like he had before. Because he's not going to want to give up everything he fought for. He loves us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
He's renounced him.
We have Warden Benoit. I think, Warden Benoit, are you there?
He's right here on this phone.
Oh, sorry. We have, Warden Benoit was having some connection issues, so we have him on the phone. Are you there, Warden Benoit?
That's right, I'm here.
All right, we're ready for you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to say that I've known this colleague for a very, very, very long time. He was always a very quiet guy, a very hard worker. I don't know how much programming he's had. I've been gone a while, but if he doesn't, it's probably because he got up and went to work and he worked very hard every day. He actually worked for my brother for a very long time. That's where he was at when I left him, But He's always out in the for the institution. He's got a good work ethic. I think he can go out and really do well for himself.
All right, well, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time in sharing that information with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Carrie Myers with the Parole Project, is there anything briefly you'd like to say to us?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Kerry Myers, Louisiana Parole Project. We just want to say that we fully support Richard. We believe that the Richard today is not the 19-year-old who had been suffering from trauma and tried to self-medicate through alcohol, that he completely recognizes destroyed his life and took the life of someone else, which he is immensely remorseful for. Something he will continue, he lives with every day, and has made every effort to try to repay that debt. One of the things he does is hard work. He's one of the most valuable people at the institution when it comes to his skills. And I can tell you that when you're that valuable, you have very little time for other things. But he's also found the time to take victim awareness, thinking for a change, anger management, living in balance one. He understands his disease, and will ensure that he has the connections to do that. So I just want to ask this board to consider Mr. Monk today favorably, and Parole Project will stand by him.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Monk, before we turn it over to Ms. Myers, is there a statement you'd like to make to the board?
Yes, ma'am. I know I did wrong, but when I killed Miss Brother, I recognized that. And when I did, I started working, trying to change. I knew I was going to have a long road ahead of me. I also know that I cost her family a lot of pain, and that I can't change. But I can change me and make my life something that can be something positive. I've worked hard to try to show that I can be a better person. I've worked hard to try to do the things that I had to do to show that I could learn. I've learned what was wrong with me. I've learned how to fix it. I've learned how to stay away from alcohol. I've learned how to stay away from drugs. I learned that they don't mean me any good. So I have to stay away from those. I have a family that needs me, and I have a family that loves me, and I've done cost them 40 years of pain. And I've got the rest of my life to go through carrying this burden that I took a life for no reason. That I took a life that was for something that was uncalled for. I could have stayed home. But thank you.
Ms. Myers?
Thank you, ma'am. Richard's been quite humble today. He's not just a welder, he's actually a master welder, and he's built many structures at Angola in the 90s that have stood multiple hurricanes. And when I called Alan Barton and asked him what he thought about Mr. Monk and all the work he's done for Prison Enterprises, he said without hesitation, I wish I had 2 more of him. Just a week after Richard's major prostate surgery last December, he returned to work for Mr. Barton despite having a catheter and being partially incontinent. He works 7 days a week. He's a man of commitment. Warden Vinoy trusted him around his children as they were growing up at Angola, and as he shared with us today, has no hesitation in supporting Richard's release. Richard's work gives him the sense of belonging and stability that his time in the Navy could not give him. He left behind the angry, lost teenager with poor impulse control who was unable to conform or to follow orders. He's turned his life around in the way that this correctional system is designed to encourage, to develop someone's character, resilience, and ability to live with moral integrity. He is 40 years next year sober from alcohol. He did have issues with marijuana in the late 90s and that early 2000 incident, but he has been fully sober for 23 years. That is a commendable amount of time, but he doesn't take that for granted or think that that means it's a done deal. And if he is released and comes to Parole Project, that'll be his first priority, and he's said that to me himself. None of the symptoms that Richard experienced after the attack on the pier where his throat was cut, none of those symptoms have been present in the 39 years that he's been in Angola. He has never attacked anybody or harmed another person since that day. And his sorrow and remorse for killing Miss Prather are sincere and is something that's going to remain with him for the rest of his life. The level of insight that he shared today is hopefully what the board will agree is what people need to show in order to be worthy of a commutation. For these reasons, Richard humbly asks this board recommended for a commutation of sentence to 75 years. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We are prepared to vote. Mrs. Jackson will be voting first.
All right. Ms. Mock, I enjoyed talking to you this afternoon. I think you've done well. You have good disciplinary record, you have a good institutional record, you have positive remarks from the warden, and you have a strong support system and a good transition plan. So my recommendation would be a commutation to 75 years, which would be well eligible.
Thank you. Mr. O'Shea?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Monk, I echo every word Mrs. Jackson is saying. My vote is the same, to commute to 75 years.
Mr. Mirabel?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My vote likewise would be the same. Recommend to the governor to commute the sentence to 75 years for community. Good luck, please.
Mr. Freeman?
I concur with all my colleagues. Hope to commute 5 years.
Okay, Mr. Monk, and I do agree. I concur for all work. My vote is the same. So on your behalf, sir, we're going to make the recommendation to the governor that your sentence be commuted to 75 years. Would you be for that?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, let's unpack that. There's a few things that we can go over on this. One is we have the court transcripts, and two is I have a newspaper article, which I'll put both links to both the newspaper and the transcripts below. We can go over first. Here's the newspaper article. See if I can zoom in a little bit. So an Oakdale man was charged with murder Friday in connection with stabbing death Joyce Long Prather of Glenmora. Richard Monk, who was 19, was arrested at 4 p.m. in Rhapsody Parish near Pitkin by Detective Bill Robinson. He offered no resistance, and he was booked in Parish Jail. He was assisted by Texas Rangers who traced a vehicle that was seen at the scene of the murder. Traced it from one junkyard to another junkyard in Texas and back into Louisiana, he said. We're assisted by all parish detectives. Miss Prather died from stab wounds to the chest and throat. She was found at 5:45 p.m. by her husband, an M-Quick insurance agency where she worked. The business is next to Junior's Food Mart. There was no sign of a struggle at the scene. Apparently, no one heard anything, said the chief detective. Cable did not say detectives had determined the motive of the killing. She was 43. She was 43. He didn't even know how old she was. When they said, "How old do you think she was?" Miss Jackson asked him. He said, "Late 30s. You telling me in all this time you've been in prison, you didn't feel like you had a need to know how old she was? You wouldn't want to know everything about her if you were truly mourning? How many kids she had? No, nothing. You don't even care." She was maybe mid-30s. That's what he said. Something messed up about that, in my opinion. Miss Monk was a member of the Glen. If you were seriously remorseful, you would know how old she was. You would know how old the person was who you killed if you were seriously, authentically remorseful. Survivors include her husband, her 2 sons, she's in Texas, 2 daughters, her parents, 1 sister, and a grandchild. I wonder where they are. It's, you know, just because they didn't show up, it does not mean that they chose not to show up. We have seen before, we have seen hearings where commutation hearing actually. So after the commutation hearing, first the governor has to sign off on this, right? If the governor doesn't sign it, he's not going anywhere. Once the governor signs it, there's then a parole hearing. And we have seen a parole hearing where the family showed up and was irate, insisting that they had never gotten notified, that they were not told about the commutation hearing. So that's always a possibility. Why there was no one representing the family, and according, no one either representing the DA. Now, you might say, and this is something that we can get into, you might say this was such a long time ago, he's doing great. The point of prison is to punish and to protect. But the problem I have with this case is that he was a 19-year-old man. He walked into a store. He stabbed her 4 times and then slit her throat and left. There was nothing stolen. He didn't know her. It was the most random act of, and what's terrifying about that, oh, and he had 16 bottles and then another, so he had like 24 bottles of beer. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of people that are gonna have 24 bottles of beer over the course of a day, and they don't start slicing people's necks. Onto that, what his daughter said, oof, like what a strange. Sometimes you hear this like speeches that just blow your mind. A lot of people do really stupid stuff when they're 19. How is that something that you say? Yeah, you're right. A lot of people do really dumb stuff. We are all guilty of doing really dumb stuff. But slitting a woman's throat is not a really dumb thing. Okay? So, like, just don't go there. Then also, she said in her speech, when Mrs. Western Prather died, when she died, no. She didn't die. Your father murdered her. Don't say when she died. Like, it's like even in the family, it trickles down. There's no accountability. Like, how is that someone's speech? People do a lot of dumb things when they're 19. Because of him, I haven't done dumb things. You know, when she died, it changed his life forever. It's like, what are you saying? Then they're all saying, like, what a great dad he is. What a great dad he is because his phone calls and his visits. It's like, I don't know. What are you comparing it to? Is it because he's like, I get it that people could be, you know, it's just, I don't know. I guess you could be, you know, you could be bad and you could be a very attentive dad, well, doing the best you can while you're locked away. I mean, I guess if you, it'd be hard to describe it, I guess. Now, here's the facts of the case. Leading to the, and I'll put the link in the description. On Monday, 7th, 1983, the defendant's car broke down in front of the convenience store. And he was working on his car, so it broke down. So he decided to work on a car that day, and the car remained in the location for the rest of the day on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, 1983, the automobile was still parked at the convenience store in that afternoon, and the defendant worked on the car, which is interesting because if you look at this, if I recall from his story, it was that he was driving, got a 6-pack of beer, continued to drive, got another 6-pack of beer, and then his car broke down and he got another 6-pack of beer. So according to this story, it's not matching the story he told today. It's not. here, the car's been in for 2 days. While the defendant worked and was on bill, he took a break and went to the convenience store and purchased a 6-pack of beer. That part's true. See? So he's trying to fix his car. He purchased a 6-pack of beer because, nothing like fixing a car and beer. Hey, that's true. Who wouldn't want to fix a car and have beer? I'm not being sarcastic there. Sounds like a good idea. The Mr. Quick Insurance Agency was located. He was there for 3 days. There's such a likelihood that he was watching her go in and out of her agency for those like 2 or 3 days. Away from the convenience store, it was housed in a small mobile building, LA Highway 165. The victim of this homicide, Miss Joyce Prether, had recently purchased the agency where she usually worked in the office alone. On March 9, 1983, Mrs. Prether was working at her office as usual. 4:23 at approximately 3:34 p.m. that afternoon, she walked over to the convenience store by the defendant's automobile and purchased a soft drink and some ice and returned to her office. How unfortunate. A short while after returning to her office, the defendant appeared. Mr. Monk asked and received a quote for insurance on his automobile. After receiving the quote, the defendant left the building and returned a short while after inquiring about insurance on unimproved farmland. Unimproved farmland. As Miss Prether went into the rear part of the office, apparently to get a calendar for the defendant attacked her. So she went to get him a calendar, and he attacked her, stabbing her 4 times in the chest and once in the neck with a hunting knife. He went into the store with the hunting knife. He's not just carrying a hunting knife on him. This is premeditated. He then left the building on foot, carrying the calendar with him. Yeah, a lot of, we're all dumb 19-year-olds who go and just murder, the mother and grandmother with the hunting knife. It's just, okay, so the defendant was leaving the building and he was on foot and walking to his home. He's picked up by an acquaintance and driven to his mother-in-law's home. His mother-in-law took him to his wife's grandfather's home, and from there, his wife's grandfather, and he came back to Glenmora and towed his car away from the convenience store. So he was able to get a tow truck. Ironically, the sheriff deputies and police stood and watched as it was towed away as they investigated the murder. Wow. You can't make that up. So they're investigating it, and the tow truck comes and tows away the car. And meanwhile, the calendar and I think knife is in that car. Now, how did they catch him? Investigation by the Rapid City's Parish Sheriff's Department and the city resulted in the arrest of the defendant on charges first degree. His arrest defendant gave a full. They don't say how. He confessed. The defendant was tried 1983 on the offense second-degree murder. When jury returned a verdict of guilty as charged, I don't even know why they give it second degree. He went in there with the knife. I guess they just, they wanted to make it an easier sentence, I guess. But sensitive. The prosecuting attorney went to high school to. Oh, this is why it was appealed. They're saying that they went to high school together. I think the district attorney and the appeals were denied. Okay, so what do I like? What? There's a few things that I just feel like I need to bring up on this case, and again, I'll drop the links to that in the description. But it's what causes a 19-year-old man boy to to walk into a location and kill a woman to death, stab her to death. Like, there was no provocation. There was no motive. What causes that? Then you hear the thing about how he's in the Navy and he got his throat slit. I really wonder what the real story is behind that too. You know, I mean, if my imagination were to go wild, I would think maybe he slit his own throat to get out. Some fascination with knives or something. And well, I'm saying this because it's like, they're so focused on his alcohol, but what if he has some mental illness? And they're saying, well, he has a perfect record. He has nothing violent in prison. And I get that. I can't argue with that. But, I mean, what if there's just some undiagnosed mental illness that we don't understand? Because it doesn't seem like anyone brought that up at all. A normal person doesn't walk into a store and there was no motive. So you just have to say he's like crazy. If he's not crazy, then he's a psychopath. And if he's a psychopath, then what's going to stop them from doing it again? Like, I just don't get it. I have a hard time with this one. I'm all for it would be easier if this was like a robbery gone bad, it would just be easier. But it's not. It was like a completely senseless crime that everyone is just like saying whatever. He just did it because he was drunk, and that doesn't make sense. And you know what? If you are blaming alcohol, then what you're admitting to here is that he is one moment and he is one day away from having too much to drink, and he'll become a murderer again. And if that's the case, how can you trust him outside? He's got a long life ahead of him. All he has to do is go over the wagon one time and then decide that, well, here's a nice knife. Let me go in there and slit your throat. Why not? I'm drunk. I had too many beers. It's like, no, I can't. I can't with this one. And I would love to see him out. He's spent his whole life locked up, but again, if I can't wrap my mind around what caused it to happen, then how do you know that people are going to be safe? And he showed very little insight in his answers. Like, what do you learn from victim awareness? And it was like his answer was just like a gerbil mess. He didn't have any idea how old his victim was. Like, no insight into himself. I don't know. Help me out here in the comment section. With that, I'll let you go.